May I now request Honorable Mrs. Justice B.V. Nagaratna to present a memento to Ms. Cynthia McCaffrey, Country Representative, UNICEF, India. May I now request Ms. Cynthia McCaffrey to present a small token of respect to Honorable Mrs. Justice B.V. Nagaratna, Chairperson, Juvenile Justice Committee, Supreme Court. May I now request Honorable Mrs. Justice B.V. Nagaratna, who's known not just for her erudition, but also for her unswerving commitment to the cause of child rights and juvenile justice, to kindly deliver the opening address.
Namaskar and a very good morning to everybody. Honorable Dr. Justice Dhananjay Yashwant Chandrachud, Chief Justice of India, Srimati Annapurna Devi, Honorable Minister for Women and Child Development, my esteemed colleagues of the Supreme Court of India, Ms. Cynthia McCaffrey, Country Representative, UNICEF, India, Honorable Judges who are chairpersons and members of the Juvenile Justice Committee and POCSO committees of the High Courts, secretaries and officers from concerned ministries, Government of India and state governments, Chief Commissioner for Persons with Disability, Government of India, and State Commissioners for Persons with Disabilities, Secretary General and learned registrars of the Supreme Court of India, Mr. Gopal Mitra, UNICEF Global Lead on Disability and Development in Program Group, New York headquarters, experts and panelists, representatives from the NCPCR and State Commission for Protection of Rights, representatives from law schools, member secretaries, conveners of juvenile justice and POCSO committees of high courts, Ms. Soledad Herrero, Chief of Child Protection, UNICEF, and representatives of Team UNICEF in India, distinguished invitees, members from the media, ladies and gentlemen. I took a minute or two to state all these names because at the outset I must say that it is promising and reassuring that we have with us the support and commitment of all the dignitaries gathered here today as we strive towards the progressive realization of child rights from an intersectional and comprehensive perspective. My thanks to each one of you for your esteemed presence at the 9th National Stakeholders Consultation on Child Protection, being organized under the aegis of the Juvenile Justice Committee, Supreme Court of India, in association with UNICEF in India. I welcome all the dignitaries and distinguished invitees present here on behalf of the Juvenile Justice Committee of the Supreme Court of India. I express my gratitude to Honorable the Chief Justice of India, Dr. D.Y. Chandrachud, for accepting our invitation to inaugurate this national consultation and to deliver the inaugural address despite his extremely busy schedule. He would speak from his heart on his experience with fostering two daughters, Priyanka and Mahi, with disabilities. I welcome the Honorable Minister, Ms. Annapurna Devi, for taking the time to grace the occasion. The Ministry of Women and Child Development is something very close to our heart. Ms. Cynthia McCaffrey, Country Representative, UNICEF, is extended a warm welcome. I thank my esteemed colleagues for their gracious presence. The chairpersons and members of the Juvenile Justice Committees and POCSO committees are extended a warm welcome, and so also the members of the said committees. Mr. Gopal Mitra, UNICEF Global Lead on Disability and Development in Program Group, New York headquarters, has been kind enough to be present here for this consultation and to be a panelist. All the distinguished invitees, panelists, experts, and delegates are welcome to this consultation. I hope we would have a deep and meaningful engagement with this year's theme, identified as Protecting the Rights of Children Living with Disability, focus on CICL and CNCP, and intersectionality of disabilities. From the lens of a transformative constitution and judges discharging duties under it, it was felt that the judicial apparatus must make positive efforts to take the march of administrative step up forward when it comes to core issues of social governance. We must all acknowledge and take this innovative interinstitutional dialogue forward. In this spirit, I convey my heartfelt appreciation for your contribution to the theme this year as a national endeavor led by the State Juvenile Justice and POCSO committees of the State High Courts with equal collaboration from nodal departments, agencies, and academies. We started the process for juvenile justice consultation in March this year with identifying the theme and the areas which could be prioritized for focus this year. After due deliberations on the inputs received, the focus areas for this year were identified within the larger theme of protection services for children with disabilities. To be able to get a pragmatic sense of the on-ground challenges and progress in both policy and practice, we introduced disability disaggregation on identified indicators from data to review progress and to understand better obstacles in justice for children in conflict with the law. In addition, we introduced some key indicators specific to services and schemes for children with disabilities within the juvenile justice system, pertaining to both children in need of care and protection and children in conflict with the law. We thank all the states for their timely submission of the data and hope that the states have reviewed it to be able to better inform policy and practice. These will be included in the report to be published as an aftermath to the national consultation. In a world where resources are limited and competing priorities abound, ensuring that policies affecting children living with disabilities are grounded in robust data and rigorous research is paramount. In this context, a quote from Judith Hoyman's book, Being Hoyman, is most instructive. She contracted polio in 1949 in Brooklyn, New York, and began to use a wheelchair for her mobility. She said, and I quote, "I think what people miss sometimes when they are thinking about disabled people is our vulnerability. Our continued need for help as disabled adults makes us vulnerable. Over 80% of women with disabilities will be sexually abused in our lifetimes, which is about 4 times the rate among non-disabled women. What is even worse is that people don't believe us when it happens. They use our inability to speak or our developmental disabilities as reasons not to believe us," unquote. The above quote captures the importance of adopting an intersectional approach when we look at issues of social justice, a facet of which are children living with disability. Article 15(3) of the Constitution of India is the article of faith for women and children of this country. There can be no manner of doubt that the Juvenile Justice Act, the Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act are but instantations of the constitutional philosophy of social justice. As per Article 45 and 47 of the Indian Constitution, the state is obliged to not just treat public education and health as its primary duty, but also make all possible efforts to ensure equitable access to education and healthcare services. Thus, we must give our anxious consideration to the question of how effectively have the provisions in the Rehabilitation Council of India Act 1992, the National Trust Act 1999 for Autism, and the RPWD Act concerning the protection of children with disabilities have been implemented so far. How far have we come in realizing the socio-economic rights of children with disabilities? According to the UNICEF fact sheet, Children with Disabilities, August 2022, such children are disproportionately living in childcare institutions, with some estimates showing that up to 25% of all young people in such facilities having intellectual disabilities or mental health conditions. The mortality rate for children with disabilities in institutional care is several times higher than for other children, as per this study. Children with disabilities can face stigma, along with negative attitudes and beliefs that place them at an increased risk of violence and neglect, abuse and exploitation, among others. Violent forms of discipline can also be driven by prevailing attitudes towards disability itself. We must take stock of what is the number of children with disability belonging to economically weaker sections who have secured admissions in private schools under Section 12 of the RTE Act. Otherwise, they would be prone to be abandoned, surrendered, or married early by parents, guardians, and community members due to the additional stress perceived by providing care. As per UDICE 2021-2022, only 2.26 million children with disabilities were enrolled in schools, which is 0.9% of the total enrollment. Within this reality, intersectionality with gender or from gender identities across the LGBTQ spectrum puts children at additional vulnerabilities. Moreover, our social biases often show in the way in which we refer to persons with disabilities and children with disabilities. In popular culture mediums, disabilities are often villainized or caricatured. This speaks volumes of not only our blind spots, but also the stigmas and taboos associated with disabilities present and perpetrated. The time for action is now. In a recent landmark judgment by Honorable Chief Justice of India, Dr. Chandrachud, and Brother Justice Padiwala held that, quote, language that individualizes the impediment and overlooks the disabling social barriers, example, terms such as afflicted, suffering, and victim, should be avoided or adequately flagged as contrary to the social model. I am grateful to Honorable the Chief Justice of India and the Supreme Court's Committee on Accessibility for guiding us on the actual path towards removing these semantic barriers with the handbook concerning persons with disability, which is being released today. Recognizing the constitutional intent of ensuring substantive equality for persons with disabilities, the handbook extrapolates the spirit and structure of extant legislative framework. I find great comfort that decision makers and institutions will find instructive the handbook's exposition of possible reasonable accommodations that could be provided for the benefit of persons with disabilities. It is my deepest hope that stakeholders and readers will sincerely imbibe the principles on semantics for referring to persons with disabilities and individuals with mental health conditions that have been painstakingly enunciated in the chapter. The way ahead is not to assume that we can be the sole guardians of the experience and voices of children living with disabilities, but instead to provide an unconditional and accommodating platform that allows them to themselves elevate their individual and shared experiences on an equal basis with other children. In that light, I am proud that the mission statement of this year's national consultation, Invisible No More, a statement of inclusion by children with disabilities, has been also prepared. Children and persons with disabilities struggle because of the intersection of a vulnerability with a barrier. If barriers are removed, children become part of society with equal access to opportunities. Thus, policies should focus on removing these, such as inaccessible social services and systems, lack of access to assistive technology, lack of accessible communication formats, and limited support for their parents or caregivers. Removing barriers entails ensuring that our schemes and services are inclusive and that they factor in reasonable accommodation. What this means in terms of protection services for children is having in-depth understanding of the situation for children with disabilities, having access to the right information, updated data, and knowledge sources. This would entail having regular and relevant surveys, introducing disability indicators as per the RPWD Act, and appropriate outreach services with identification, early diagnosis, and referral systems established. This holds true for both children in the community and children residing in institutions. Ensuring ease of access to identification, referral, medical, legal, educational, counseling, and assistive services for children with disabilities. Ensuring enhanced social security to families of children with disabilities by way of reasonable accommodation. Focusing on breaking the stigma around disabilities. Often the bullying faced by children in communities, homes, schools, and neighborhoods increases mental distress to these children and leads to their retraction from social life and oftentimes dropping out of schools, increasing their chances of becoming children in need of care and protection, and even children in conflict with the law. The juvenile justice system, with its emphasis on being inclusive, of ensuring social safety nets for all children, should be looking at the range of these services with even greater emphasis. This would warrant greater convergence between departments, services, and schemes. Specifically for children in conflict with law, it would be of utmost importance to ensure justice for children with disabilities instead of criminalizing their disabilities, which well may happen especially in the case of learning and intellectual disabilities. This requires all our attention. I appeal to this eminent assembly to draw force from the words of Stephen Hawking, the world-renowned physicist who demonstrated that living with disability need not be an obstacle to success. He acknowledged that it was his support ecosystem that emboldened him to fruitfully achieve productive employment and personal fulfillment, as he called. Desiring the same for others living with disabilities, he said, and I quote, "We have a moral duty to remove the barriers to participation and to invest sufficient funding and expertise to unlock the vast potential of people with disabilities. Governments throughout the world can no longer overlook the hundreds of millions of people with disabilities who are denied access to health, rehabilitation, support, education, and employment and never get the chance to shine." Unquote. I hope the two-day national deliberations, along with the preceding discussions at the state level, will help pave the way for concrete action plans and commitments which we can see to fruition over the years. The momentum we are able to build this year can be instrumental for the change we can catalyze collectively in improving protection services for children with disabilities. At this juncture, I must express my deepest gratitude to Honorable the Chief Justice of India, Dr. D.Y. Chandrachud, for his leadership, imbued with compassion and sensitivity in cases and initiatives targeted towards justice and children. I request that we all give a standing ovation to our Chief Justice for his guidance and for his experience. Thank you. I have taken a few minutes more. I pray for the excuse. I thank you all for your kind attention. Namaskar.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Your address has ignited a flicker of hope and compassion in the hearts of all who are fortunate enough to be here in attendance today. Your address was indeed a profound call to collective action to build a more inclusive, compassionate, and just society where every individual, regardless of ability, can survive, revive, and thrive. UNICEF India has always been instrumental in lending its support in the journey of protection of child rights. Ms. Cynthia McCaffrey, as country representative, UNICEF India, has relentlessly championed the cause of child rights. On this special occasion, I request Ms. Cynthia McCaffrey to kindly share her reflections and thoughts drawn from the wealth of wisdom and experience that she has garnered over the years.
Sabiko Mare Namaste. Honorable, don't applaud yet, but that was pretty good for me. Honorable Dr. Justice Chandrachud, Ms. Devi, the Honorable Minister of Women and Child Development, Mrs. Justice Nagaratna, Honorable Chairperson of Juvenile Justice Committee and Judge Supreme Court of India. On behalf of UNICEF, I thank the Honorable Supreme Court and High Court's leadership for a decade of commitment to elevate attention to children's rights across India, and for this year's focus on building an inclusive society for children living with disabilities. Today, UNICEF is truly humbled and honored for the opportunity to be with the national and state dignitaries and the key stakeholders responsible for advancing children's rights across India. This year marks 75 years of UNICEF's partnership with the government and people of India, and we're proud to have worked alongside you advancing children's rights and to be here to stay with you as you continue that journey. I offer UNICEF's appreciation to the Minister of Women and Child Development and the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment for spearheading the Government of India's efforts and working hand in hand with many ministries and departments who are here today for this consultation and taking us forward even further. And most importantly, following the motto, "Nothing about us without us," the cornerstone of the movement for respectful inclusion of persons with disabilities, children and young people present here today, for the role that you have all played in the preparation and in the important state consultations, and for always reminding us that their voices, that their aspirations are an important guide for all of our deliberations. Toward that end, and picking up on our Honorable Chairperson's points, I wanted to make a few key points as we continue with our deliberations. And first, why this agenda is so important. First, because protecting children with disability is not simply about the right thing to do. It's our collective accountability to protect the rights of every child. Therefore, it's an accountability that we're coming together to achieve. Secondly, it makes socioeconomic sense. Investing in education yields a remarkably high return, with returns 3 times higher for children with disability as compared to the general population. And third, as we just heard, there's still a large agenda to tackle. A global data report reveals that 1 in every 10 children in the world have a disability. But that report goes on to not just talk about the sheer numbers, but the impact of those children's lives that they're leading. They are more likely, a child living with a disability, to never have attended school. They're more likely to feel unhappy or to experience severe corporal punishment. And these global intersections of child protection are well documented, and it's important that we understand them as we come up with the solutions and move forward. The statistics that we heard about institutions and institutionalization of children. 1 in 3 children in institutions globally across the world is a child living with a disability. And children with disabilities are 4 to 6 times more likely to be detained. And girls living with disabilities are 1.7 times more likely to be married. So that's why this is important. We're protecting children's rights, there's a socioeconomic investment, and we have a big agenda. Secondly, we have a strong foundation on which to build. India's national commitment is serious and real. India was one of the first signatories to the Convention on the Rights of Persons Living with Disabilities in 2007, the first human rights treaty of the 21st century. With that, over the next decade, India advanced a solid policy and legal architecture to protect people with disabilities. The Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act in 2016 signaled an important shift from viewing persons with disabilities from a welfare medical perspective to one with a human rights approach. India has continued with its National Policy for Children in 2013, the National Education Policy 2020, that reiterates the government's commitment to protecting the rights and well-being of children with disabilities and ensuring access to protection services, to inclusive education. The Mission Vatsalya, Juvenile Justice Act, and POCSO Act prioritize the best interest principle for all children, aiming to create a comprehensive social safety net. That brings me to my third point, and one of the most important for why we're all here, recognizing this big agenda, coming together with the collective responsibility and action to remove those barriers. And it is possible. When I look out in the audience and I see Gauranshi Sharma, a 16-year-old adolescent from Bhopal, with the unwavering support of her parents, she became a badminton champion, represented India, and won the gold medal in Deaflympics. She became a UNICEF ambassador, youth ambassador this year, and advocated across India around inclusion. She just got back from New York, where she took India's message about what we're trying to do to include children living with disabilities, addressing and delivering that message to global leaders at the UN General Assembly. She reminds us, and people with disabilities remind us, that we can take specific actions, come together. First, looking at the issue of convergence. And over my 2 years here, I've learned a great deal about convergence from India. And the Ministry of Women and Child Development looks carefully at the whole child. So as we look at how we address children living with disability, we consider their health, but also their education, their protection, mental health, the need for legal aid. The convergence goes beyond what the child needs, but how do we come together, cutting across states, cutting across public sector, private sector, NGOs with the public sector, academia. All of these to come together for looking at how we have inclusive practices and policies. And when I think of this, I see starlings and how they fly. Up to 1 million starlings can fly in a pattern, and they do that by coming together, identifying the barriers and the hurdles, and leading and following each other to overcome them. Second is specialization. A skilled and specialized workforce is essential for the full inclusion and care and protection of children with disability. Having that double track where we provide access for those who are living with disabilities into the mainstream services, but have a dedicated, well-trained workforce who can identify the issues and with expertise enable them to overcome and still soar. Third is the prevention and early detection. Many and most of the causes of disabilities are preventable and are secondary impacts of disabilities. I saw this in real life when I visited Narmada district in Gujarat, where they have taken the power of looking at early detection at every important stage of a child's life, at birth and then throughout the milestones during those formative years, screening children, identifying early, and then supporting them and their families, and embedding the 4 Ds, defects, diseases, deficiencies, and development delays. Being able to do that in a systematic way can transform the trajectory of a child's life as well as the family's life. Fourth, as we deliberate, is looking at families. Report and data again and again notes the damage of growing up in institutional settings and is globally well documented the importance of being in a safe family environment. That's why it is codified in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. In 2019, the General Assembly focused on this with a momentous consensus by unanimously adopting the global resolution focusing on the right to live in a family environment. Children with disabilities have a right to grow up in a safe and family environment. And we've heard that many of them are often in institutions. How do we build the systems, the protections that enable them with the support to them and the support to their families, to the caregivers, to remain in family settings? And fifth, inclusion. It's our collective responsibility to create an inclusive environment. And let me end there, because I think this codifies and captures everything. How do we create, through the policies, the legal architecture, the systems, to create an inclusive system? Yesterday, UNICEF had the opportunity with the UN to meet with a number of organizations working with children and people living with disabilities. And one of them recounted a story and said, a few years ago, we were planning for the Global Disability Day. And we said to each other, the adults, what should we do? And one of them said, I'm going to ask the children what they want to do. She came back, she said, I asked the children, what do you want to do? And they said, we'd like to go to the beach. We'd like to have a party and get together with our friends. Or maybe we could have a concert or go to a concert and enjoy music. I thought that was a very telling reminder. Children with disabilities are children, first and foremost. They want to play. They want to learn. They want to live. They want to listen. They know they're going to fall down, and they want someone to pick them up and help them. So first and foremost, we're doing all this to make sure that children have the opportunity everywhere, no matter what their ability, where they're from, to make sure that they have the systems that helps them to soar, to fly, because that's what a child does. They just run with force into life. I'm going to end with a quote from the American entrepreneur Mary Kay Ash. Aerodynamically, it is impossible for the bumblebee to fly. But the bumblebee doesn't know this, and so it flies anyway. UNICEF is honored to be working alongside you to help every child fly anyway.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing your valuable and well-meaning insights, which show that all development actors need to urgently adopt intersectionality as an overarching approach in their programs, strategies, and action plans to ensure disability inclusion. I'm sure that after attending this national consultation and hearing your words of wisdom, we shall all strive to look at children with disabilities with a multi-dimensional prism and collectively resolve to work together to create a better future for all of them. Documentaries are like a mirror that reflects to us our own humanity, our triumphs, our flaws, and our potential for growth. It is with this thought in mind that we are releasing a documentary film on children with disabilities, which shows that children with disabilities have an equal right of participation and inclusion, and that the onus is on all of us to collectively ensure that these rights are realized in their true letter and spirit. This thought-provoking documentary shall show that the ability of children with disabilities is not limited, but maybe our imagination is. This documentary shall nudge and gently cajole us to listen to and amplify the voices of these children. As we watch this documentary, many of the stereotypical notions and assumptions that we have regarding the children with disabilities shall be challenged and our empathy ignited. This 8 minutes long documentary shall inspire all of us to embrace diversity and inclusion. May we now have the documentary played.
Children with disability, like all other individuals with disability, are capable of leading dignified lives. They're able to participate fully in society if only we give them that opportunity to do so on an equal platform.
पहले हमको पढ़ाई शुरू करने में बहुत कठिनाई गरीबताई थी, तो बहुत कठिनाई होती थी। जब बच्ची का सहायता राशि मिलने लगी कुछ मदद के रूप में, तो फिर हमको पढ़ाने लिखाने में बहुत अच्छा सुविधा पड़ी है। तो अब मेरी सोच है कि हम बच्चे को पढ़ा करके मतलब अपने से ऊंचा जगह पे उसको डॉक्टर या मास्टर जो भी वो बनना चाहे उसको हम बना सकते हैं।
We have to create as a society equal opportunities for children, equal opportunities on the one hand in terms of recognizing that they have minds of their own, they have volitions of their own, they know what is in their interest and welfare, consistent of course with their maturity as age progresses.
The nature and degree of psychological distress experienced by children with disabilities depends on a variety of factors such as the type and severity of the disability, support from families or caregivers, access to resources, and the environment they live in. Social stigma, discrimination or bullying may lead to anxiety, depression, low self-esteem. Additionally, children may encounter barriers to social participation or forming social connection, making them feel lonely and socially isolated. You see, while the legal frameworks are robust, there is always room for improvement in implementation. In fact, we have seen many positive impacts after the consultation over the decades, particularly in terms of policy creation and advocacy for inclusivity. Children's common justice problems are driven by exclusion, inaccessible justice, lack of prevention, barriers to identity, violence, limits to association and detention. These factors impact children individually and have collective structural equivalence. These are even more exacerbated for children with disability. The judiciary therefore has a crucial role in interpreting and enforcing the laws that protect children with disabilities.
यह दिव्यांग बच्चों की पुकार है। यह दिव्यांग बच्चों की आवाज उनके अनुभवों और उनकी उम्मीदों को दर्शाता है और परिवार, शिक्षक, स्वास्थ्य सेवाएं देने वाले, नीतियां बनाने वाले सभी से आग्रह करता है कि एक ऐसी दुनिया बनाई जाए जहां कोई भी बच्चा पीछे ना छूटे।
What is needed as on date is empathy. What is needed is compassion towards such children. And you can't inculcate such compassion or such empathy by just creating public awareness. Empathy has to come from within. Compassion has something to do with feelings. People with such compassion, people with empathy are the people who can do the best for children with such disabilities.
पिछले 2 वर्ष से स्कूल जाना स्टार्ट किया है, जिससे उसमें काफी इम्प्रूवमेंट हम लोग को देखने को मिल रहा है। ये अपने आप को सहज हम लोग के साथ इसलिए फील करता है कि हम लोग के यहाँ पे जो बाल गृह में है वो एक कम्युनिटी, एक परिवार जैसे हैं, तो वो सबके साथ सहज महसूस करके बहुत अच्छे से ये कम्युनिकेट करता, बातचीत करता है, जिससे उसका स्पीच और भी अच्छा से डेवलप हो पा रहा है।
At the heart of the inclusion approach is the imperative to make sure that children with disabilities, organizations of people with disabilities are consulted, engaged, and listened to in anything that concerns them. At the end of the day, they are really the experts of their own experiences and therefore truly the best advocates and partners in this agenda.
हम समाज का हिस्सा बनना चाहते हैं, सड़कों, मॉल, पार्कों में जाना चाहते हैं और बाहर सुरक्षित महसूस करना चाहते हैं। हम सस्ते, सुलभ परिवहन और ऐसे शिक्षक चाहते हैं जो हमें समझें, ताकि हम भी सीख सकें और सफल हो सकें। परीक्षा के दौरान सहायक उपकरण हमें उचित अवसर देंगे।
As UNICEF commemorates its 75th year in India, we look forward to continue our journey together to advance the rights of every child in the country.
this documentary did make us realize the importance of empathy, that empathy has no script. There is no right way or wrong way to do it. It's simply listening, holding space, withholding judgment, emotionally connecting, and communicating that incredibly healing message: you are not alone. I would now like to call upon Srimati Annapurna Devi, Honorable Minister for Women and Child Development, Government of India, to kindly address this august gathering.
नमस्कार। आज इस कार्यक्रम में उपस्थित मुख्य रूप से भारत के माननीय मुख्य न्यायाधीश श्री D.Y. चंद्रचूड़ जी, आदरणीय न्यायाधीश उच्चतम न्यायालय श्रीमती B.V. नागरत्ना जी, अध्यक्ष जुवेनाइल जस्टिस कमेटी, यूनिसेफ इंडिया की प्रतिनिधि श्रीमती सिंधिया जी, उच्च न्यायालय एवं उच्चतम न्यायालय के माननीय न्यायाधीशगण और देश के विभिन्न राज्यों से आए गणमान्य अतिथिगण, आज इस गरिमामयी सभा में हम सब एक बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण विषय पर चर्चा करने के लिए एकत्रित हुए हैं। साथियों, बाल संरक्षण एक बड़ा ही व्यापक शब्द है और इसमें जब हमारे दिव्यांग बच्चों पर विशेष ध्यान दिया जा रहा है तो इस शब्द की व्यापकता और भी बढ़ जाती है। बाल संरक्षण का मुद्दा हम सबसे जुड़ा हुआ है। हमारी जनसंख्या में 1/3 से अधिक हिस्सा बच्चों का है। यहाँ यह सभा इस बात का प्रमाण है कि भारत अपने बच्चों की भलाई और सुरक्षा को कितना महत्व देता है। हमारे माननीय प्रधानमंत्री श्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी के नेतृत्व में हमारी सरकार प्रत्येक बच्चे को सुरक्षित और संरक्षित वातावरण प्रदान करने के लिए कृत संकल्पित है। माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी की बाल संरक्षण के प्रति प्रतिबद्धता इस तथ्य में दिखाई देती है कि महिला एवं बाल विकास मंत्रालय के तहत बाल संरक्षण के लिए बजट आवंटन जो 2009-10 में लगभग 60 करोड़ था, उसको बढ़ाकर 2024-25 में लगभग 1500 करोड़ किया गया है। साथियों, हम सब ने बचपन की कुछ न कुछ चुनौतियों को महसूस किया है। हम सब ने देखा है कि कुछ ऐसे सामाजिक अपराध हैं जिनमें अपराधियों के लिए बच्चे सबसे इजी और वल्नरेबल टारगेट होते हैं और उनमें भी यदि दिव्यांग बच्चा हो तो वो बच्चों में भी सबसे वल्नरेबल बच्चा बन जाता है। और ऐसे में समाज की और सरकार की यह सम्मिलित रूप से जिम्मेवारी बन जाती है कि हम बच्चों के संरक्षण पर ध्यान केंद्रित करें, क्योंकि वह अपनी सुरक्षा खुद से नहीं कर सकते। कई बार तो उन्हें अंदेशा भी नहीं होता है कि वो जिस चीज से गुजर रहे हैं वह एक अपराध है। उनके साथ जो घरेलू हिंसा होती है, जो साइबर अपराध होता है, दिव्यांग बच्चों के साथ जो बुलिंग होती है, उस पर हमें बहुत ही गंभीरता से ध्यान देना होगा। साथ ही हमें यह भी ध्यान देना होगा कि बच्चों का आपराधिक इस्तेमाल न हो। सामाजिक वास्तविकताओं पर भी विचार करना होगा, क्योंकि कई बच्चों को गिरोहों द्वारा आपराधिक गतिविधियों में धकेला जाता है। दिव्यांग बच्चे विशेषकर और असुरक्षित हैं, जैसे कि देखा गया कि दृष्टिबाधित बच्चे अक्सर उन्हें और आपराधिक सिंडिकेट द्वारा कहीं न कहीं भीख मांगने इत्यादि के लिए उन्हें लाया जाता है। साथियों, भारत सरकार ने और विशेषकर महिला एवं बाल विकास मंत्रालय ने समय समय पर ऐसे अनेक नियमों व अधिनियमों को अधिसूचित किया है जो हमारे बच्चों के, विशेषकर हमारे दिव्यांग बच्चों के संरक्षण की दिशा में महत्वपूर्ण कदम साबित हो रहे हैं। किशोर न्याय अधिनियम 2015 बच्चों की सुरक्षा व उनके विकास को समर्पित इसी प्रकार का एक कानून है। साथ ही सरकार ने बच्चों के प्रति बढ़ते यौन अपराधों को गंभीरता से लेते हुए पॉक्सो एक्ट को भी मजबूत किया है। भारतीय न्याय संहिता 2023 में भी महिलाओं और बच्चों की मानव तस्करी से संबंधित अपराधों की रोकथाम करने को अत्यधिक महत्व देते हुए पर्याप्त प्रावधान किए गए हैं। विधायिका और कार्यपालिका का तो कार्य है ही वह नियम बनाए और उसका क्रियान्वयन करवाए, लेकिन जब हम नियम तोड़े जाते हैं तो न्यायपालिका का कार्य प्रमुख हो जाता है। यहाँ माननीय सर्वोच्च न्यायालय के सर्वोच्च न्यायमूर्ति माननीय चंद्रचूड़ जी बैठे हैं। इनकी उपस्थिति में मैं यहाँ उपस्थित सभी माननीय न्यायमूर्तियों से ये कहना चाहती हूँ कि आप सबने भारत की न्याय व्यवस्था को जिस तरह से मजबूत किया है तथा जनता के मन में न्यायपालिका के प्रति जो विश्वास जगाया है वो अतुलनीय है। लेकिन जैसा कि हम जानते हैं कि हमें अभी भी और बहुत कुछ करने की आवश्यकता है। साथियों, जब बालकों और बालिकाओं से संबंधित मुद्दा आता है, विशेषकर दिव्यांग बच्चों से संबंधित जब मुद्दा आता है, तो उसे हम सबको और भी संवेदनशील होकर देखने की आवश्यकता है। वैसे तो आप सब खुद ही बहुत अनुभवी हैं और आप सब ने बच्चों से संबंधित मामलों का जो लैंडमार्क डिसीजन दिए हैं, जैसे चाइल्ड पोर्नोग्राफी पर कुछ ही दिन पूर्व दिया गया महत्वपूर्ण निर्णय, और इससे हम सब अवगत हैं। आज का यह दिन हम सबको एक बार फिर से यह बात याद दिलाने के लिए है कि हम सबको मिलकर अपने बच्चों की सुरक्षा तथा उनके विकास की ओर ध्यान देना होगा। साथ ही जैसा कि मैंने शुरू में जिक्र किया कि बाल संरक्षण का दायरा अत्यंत व्यापक है। बाल संरक्षण का अर्थ केवल बच्चों की सुरक्षा करना नहीं है, बल्कि यह उनके अधिकारों की रक्षा भी है। बच्चों के अधिकारों के संबंध में संयुक्त राष्ट्र संघ का कन्वेंशन ऑन राइट ऑफ चिल्ड्रन बाल अधिकारों के लिए बुनियादी सिद्धांतों को स्थापित करता है, जिन्होंने विश्व भर में किशोर न्याय प्रणाली का मार्गदर्शन किया। ये इस धारणा पर आधारित है कि बच्चे भी समान रूप से इंसान हैं। हमें जागरूकता फैलानी होगी और लोगों को ये बताना होगा कि बच्चों के अधिकारों के प्रति संवेदनशील रहना कितना जरूरी है। हमें लोगों को यह भी समझाना होगा कि हर बच्चे का जीवन मूल्यवान है और उन्हें प्रेम और सुरक्षा की भी आवश्यकता है। साथियों, किशोर न्याय अधिनियम 2015 बच्चों की सुरक्षा, संरक्षा, सम्मान और कल्याण सुनिश्चित करने का प्राथमिक कानून है। यह अधिनियम देखरेख, संरक्षण, विकास, उपचार तथा सामाजिक पुनः एकीकरण के माध्यम से उनकी बुनियादी जरूरतों को पूरा कर उन्हें सुरक्षा प्रदान करता है। 2021 में इसे संशोधित कर जिलाधिकारियों को वल्नरेबल बच्चों की देखभाल और सुरक्षा की जिम्मेवारी सौंपकर बाल संरक्षण को जिला प्रशासन में केंद्र बिंदु बनाया गया। हमारा लक्ष्य ऐसी प्रणालियां तैयार करना है जो बच्चों के सर्वोत्तम हित में जहां भी संभव हो बच्चों के अनुकूल, परिवार आधारित, गैर संस्थागत देखरेख को प्राथमिकता दे। किसी बच्चे के समग्र विकास के लिए बहुआयामी जरूरतों में पोषण, स्वास्थ्य, देखरेख, शिक्षा, अपराधों से सुरक्षा इत्यादि है। ये सभी बाल संरक्षण और विकास के महत्वपूर्ण पहलू हैं और किसी भी राष्ट्र की मुख्य जिम्मेवारी है। बाल संरक्षण और विकास के इन पहलुओं को ध्यान में रखते हुए महिला एवं बाल विकास मंत्रालय मिशन वात्सल्य योजना के तहत वल्नरेबल बच्चों यानी चिल्ड्रन इन कॉन्फ्लिक्ट विथ लॉ तथा चिल्ड्रन इन नीड ऑफ केयर एंड प्रोटेक्शन का कल्याण, संरक्षण और विकास सुनिश्चित करता है। साथियों, माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी ने अपने मन की बात के संबोधन में कहा था कि दिव्यांग बच्चे समाज की जिम्मेदारी है। मिशन वात्सल्य योजना के दिशा निर्देशों में राज्यों, संघ राज्य क्षेत्रों द्वारा बाल देखरेख संस्थाओं में उन चिल्ड्रन विद स्पेशल नीड पर ध्यान केंद्रित करने की परिकल्पना की गई है जो दिव्यांगता के कारण स्कूल नहीं जा पाते इन बच्चों को आवश्यकता अनुसार ऑक्यूपेशनल थेरेपी, स्पीच थेरेपी और अन्य उपचारात्मक सुविधाएं भी प्रदान की जाती है। साथ ही पोषण अभियान के तहत महिला एवं बाल विकास मंत्रालय द्वारा वर्ष 2023 में दिव्यांग बच्चों के लिए आंगनवाड़ी प्रोटोकॉल लॉन्च किया गया था, ताकि दिव्यांग बच्चों की शुरुआती लक्षणों की जांच और समुचित उपचार किया जा सके। यहां मैं इस बात का भी उल्लेख करना चाहूंगी कि विभिन्न राज्यों, राज्य सरकारों और संघ राज्य क्षेत्रों के प्रशासन से यहां उपस्थित अधिकारीगण इस बात को अवश्य समझते होंगे कि किसी भी केंद्र प्रायोजित योजना की सफलता बहुत हद तक राज्य सरकारों और संघ राज्य क्षेत्र के प्रशासन के सहयोग पर निर्भर करता है। इसलिए सभी राज्य सरकारों से अनुरोध है कि वे राज्य स्तरीय संरचनाओं जैसे बाल संरक्षण, राज्य बाल संरक्षण सोसाइटी, राज्य संसाधन दत्तक ग्रहण एजेंसी और जिला स्तरीय संरचनाओं जैसे बाल कल्याण समिति, किशोर न्याय बोर्ड और जिला बाल संरक्षण इकाइयों को सशक्त करें। राज्य सरकारों से अपेक्षा है कि सभी बाल देखरेख संस्थानों का निरीक्षण करें और किशोर न्याय अधिनियम के तहत उनका पंजीकरण भी सुनिश्चित करें। इस क्षेत्र में नागरिक समाज संगठनों का योगदान भी बहुत सराहनीय रहा है। साथ ही सभी राज्यों, संघ राज्य क्षेत्रों द्वारा मिशन वात्सल्य योजना के कार्यान्वयन की नियमित समीक्षा एवं मूल्यांकन करना भी अति आवश्यक है। साथियों, भारत की किशोर न्याय प्रणाली विश्व के अनेक देशों के लिए रोल मॉडल है। फिर भी हमारे समक्ष कई चुनौतियां हैं। बुनियादी ढांचे और संसाधन अभी भी अपर्याप्त है। दूसरी ओर हैकिंग, साइबर बुलिंग और ऑनलाइन धोखाधड़ी जैसे साइबर अपराधों में किशोर शामिल हो रहे हैं। साथ ही क्षमता निर्माण आवश्यक है और किशोर न्याय प्रणाली में शामिल सभी हितधारकों के लिए भी बाल विकास को समझना, दुर्व्यवहार के संकेतों को पहचानना और चाइल्ड फ्रेंडली अप्रोच बनाना आवश्यक है। साथियों, अंत में मैं दक्षिण अफ्रीका के पूर्व राष्ट्रपति और भारत रत्न नेल्सन मंडेला जी का एक कथन उद्धृत करना चाहूंगी। उन्होंने कहा था कि इतिहास हमारा मूल्यांकन इस आधार पर करेगा कि हम अपने बच्चों के दैनिक जीवन में क्या बदलाव लाते हैं। एक एक बच्चा राष्ट्र के द्वारा हम पर सौंपा गया एक दायित्व है। यह हमारा कर्तव्य है कि हम अपने बच्चों की सुरक्षा करें, उनका संरक्षण करें और इन्हें इस लायक बनाएं कि वो आगे चलकर इस राष्ट्र को विकास के पथ पर अग्रसर कर सके। हम देख रहे हैं कि पैरालंपिक में हमारे दिव्यांग बच्चे किस तरह अपने देश का नाम रोशन कर रहे हैं और हमें इस बात पर गर्व भी है। भारत सरकार की केंद्रीय महिला एवं बाल विकास मंत्री के रूप में मैं आप सबको यह भी विश्वास दिलाना चाहती हूं कि माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी के नेतृत्व में हमारा मंत्रालय कोई बच्चा पीछे न छूटे के लक्ष्य के प्रति पूर्ण रूप से प्रतिबद्ध और समर्पित है। आप सबने मुझे इस कार्यक्रम में बुलाया, मैं इसके लिए आप सबके प्रति बहुत बहुत आभार व्यक्त करती हूं और बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण विषय पर चर्चा हो रही है, तो इसलिए विशेष रूप से जस्टिस नागरत्ना जी को भी मैं अपनी ओर से विशेष रूप से धन्यवाद करती हूं। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, आभार।
Thank you, ma'am. Through your address, you reminded us all that child rights and disability rights are not just a matter of law, but a matter of compassion and empathy. Your words will motivate us to work tirelessly for protecting child rights. As another landmark initiative under the Honorable Chief Justice of India, the Supreme Court has developed a groundbreaking handbook concerning persons with disabilities, which seeks to shatter societal norms and pave the path to equality. This handbook, like the Supreme Court's earlier handbook on combating gender stereotypes, shall be more than just a theoretical resource. It will be a beacon of hope, a symbol of inclusivity, and a testament to our commitment to equality. It shall educate judges, lawyers, and law enforcement agencies on disability rights jurisprudence and shall equip all stakeholders to recognize and address insidious discriminatory policies and practices, thereby promoting inclusivity and respect. It shall encourage self-reflection and introspection on personal biases and inspire collective responsibility to challenge harmful stereotypes. This handbook is also being released in Braille and in an audiobook format. It will be available on the website of the Supreme Court of India, and you may also access the handbook by scanning the QR codes displayed on the tags with the conference bags. May I now request Honorable Dr. Justice D.Y. Chandrachud to kindly release the handbook. I request the dignitaries on the dais to kindly come forward for the release.
Humans are born equal in dignity and rights, and every life holds intrinsic worth. Yet, for the over 1 billion people globally who live with disabilities, equal respect remains elusive due to the deep-set social prejudices, discrimination, and stigma associated with disability. The Handbook Concerning Persons with Disabilities is a significant resource designed to aid the legal community in addressing these issues. It provides practical guidance for judges and legal professionals in understanding the social model of disability within our constitutional framework, addressing stereotypes concerning persons with disabilities, and employing respectful language. The handbook includes a glossary of terms which perpetuate stereotypes and provides alternative, respectful language for use in legal documents, orders, and judgments.
We have amongst us a judge who has authored remarkable judgments that have amplified the voices of the marginalized communities. A leader who has set precedents for future generations of judges and policymakers and inspired a culture of empathy and inclusivity in the Indian society. It's my honor and privilege to invite Dr. Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, Honorable the Chief Justice of India, to deliver the inaugural address.
Namaskar and good morning. Sister Justice B.V. Nagaratna, Chairperson of the Juvenile Justice Committee, Ms. Annapurna Devi, Minister for Women and Child Development, my distinguished colleagues in the Supreme Court, Chief Justices and Judges of the High Court, present here from all over the country, Ms. Cynthia McCaffrey, Country Representative of UNICEF India, Mr. Gopal Mitra, the UNICEF Global Lead on Disability, distinguished guests, and all those dedicated to the protection and well-being of our children. It's really a signal honor for me to participate in the inaugural session of the 9th round of the National Annual Stakeholders Consultation on Child Protection. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all the esteemed judges, secretaries from various ministries and departments, members of the law enforcement agencies, legal services authorities, commissioners for persons with disabilities, representatives of training institutes, law universities, and UNICEF for your tireless commitment and invaluable contributions to this year's juvenile justice consultations across the states. This year's theme holds a special place in my heart, the protection and well-being of children with disabilities. As someone who, together with my wife, Kalpana, who fosters two young, wonderful daughters, I am reminded daily of the joy, purpose, and love they bring into my life. They have transformed not only how I see the world, but how also I engage with it, strengthening my commitment to creating a more inclusive society where every child, regardless of their abilities, is cherished and protected. Our children suffer from a condition. They have been born with a condition called Nemollin myopathy. It's a genetic condition which they have inherited at birth. They were born in Uttarakhand. Before they came into our lives around 2014, there was an absence of knowledge about myopathy, absence of knowledge among doctors, among caregivers, and certainly complete absence of knowledge on the part of their parents. And of course, everyone lives, in a sense, in a feeling of self-denial. The families where the children are born feel that, well, there's nothing wrong with them. There were no testing facilities, even in major institutes in India. And where there were testing facilities, such as the Postgraduate Institute in Lucknow, we were told that the test then was so invasive and so painful that they would remove a part of the tissue from the child without anesthesia. It was so terribly painful. And I still remember the time when the test was done. The test had to be done for both the children, and after the older child underwent the test, all that she could say in that sense of pain and suffering for the test, she said, "Don't allow my sister to go through this, please." So there was an absence of adequate testing, absence of schools in Uttarakhand. When the children came to us in Allahabad, the sole school, which was run by the good Mr. Banerjee for children with disabilities, had shut down because Mr. Banerjee was no more. And there was no school where the children could even learn the basics of alphabet or everything that a little child aspires for. But the children would always have little school bags at home with a snack box and their bottle of water, because that represented their feelings. They aspired to go to school. So they would play school with their own little bags at home. But when we moved to Delhi, we found a school for them, which was Tamanna, run by the redoubtable Dr. Chawna. And she said that, this is not a school for these children. This is a school for children suffering from predominantly autism. But these children are fine because they have a genetic condition, but they are mentally as razor sharp as any other child. And gradually, she said, we have to mainstream these children, which is what we did. Now, we were thinking of sending them to a good school. So we went to various schools, and the first question that we asked was, how will the other children treat these children in school? And does the school have any sense of policy to ensure that these children are not bullied, that these children are not disparaged, because that would really set them back? And the principals of so many schools told us that, well, children are children, so they'll have to survive amongst other children. Until we found Sanskriti, and they said that we have mentor children, we have friends who will be associated with these children to ensure that other children learn how to deal with them. Another problem which so many of these children with disability face in school is that when you mainstream these children, because they are capable of being mainstreamed, you realize that there are very few facilities to accommodate the real needs of children. So if a child is fond of science, and the science lab is in a basement, the child can't go to the science lab for the simple reason that there is no ramp and there is no lift. So a child has to sit in class when everybody else goes to a science lab, though science is so close to that child's heart. Or when all the other children go to the playground, that child can't go to the playground because once you're out, it takes such a Herculean effort to come back to class. All of the children participate in dramatics. All of the children participate in poetry or debates. But children who have a speech defect, as all children with muscular disorders do, they're not allowed to participate in dramatics because of the fear that the audience may not have the patience or the tolerance to give that child another 2 minutes to explain what that child has to say. So these are some of the problems which good institutions face even today in capital cities like Delhi. What about gene therapy? Gene therapy is really at the cutting edge of knowledge today. I was at a conference on gene therapy in Bangalore last weekend, again for a reason very close to my heart. Now, gene therapy costs between 7 crores to 30 crores for one single dose today. Who can afford it? But there is reason for hope because countries like India are now taking steps forward to provide for accessible medicine and accessible treatment. But that has to be part of a national policy, guided and supported by the government. Policies cannot be only for the mainstream, because these children are capable of the very best. Because they have minds of their own, they have individualities of their own, they have a volition of their own. I still remember that during COVID times, I hope I'm not taking too much of your time and I'll keep to my time and then cut short my written text. During COVID times when schools were online, our little Mahi, who was then just about 9, suddenly heard the noise of a woodcutter, an electric woodcutter. And she tells the teacher, can I please break from the class for a minute because I think someone is cutting a tree in our garden. So the teacher says, yes, of course you can leave the class for a couple of minutes, but be sure to be back. So she goes into the garden and of course, lo and behold, you have the horticulture department trying to prune the trees as they normally do to make them look more attractive. And she runs into them on her wheelchair and says, you dare not touch any of these trees because these trees are homes, they are nests, and they are the homes for our birds who come here. And if you cut these trees, the birds will have no place to survive. What I want to emphasize is that there is a great deal of transformative potential in children suffering from disabilities. They are not just children who are in need of care and protection, but they have within themselves the ability to transform others, as my contact, not only with Priyanka and Mahi, but with other people suffering from disabilities I've been able to interact with, who've transformed our lives and our institution. And I'll give you a few examples just in a moment. Mahi in particular is a fierce environmentalist, and she believes in following a cruelty-free lifestyle. She's mother to 8 cats, and she single-handedly delivered a litter of 5 when her favorite cat gave birth to a 5-litter kitten just about 2 months ago in the middle of the night. But she, in the course of following a cruelty-free lifestyle, had been telling us for the last 10 years that please adopt a cruelty-free lifestyle. It took 10 years for me to be persuaded. Judges sometimes take a very long time to be persuaded, including in the court at home. But they were the reason why I switched to veganism. Because veganism is not just about being a vegetarian and excluding dairy and honey from your diet. It's also about following a lifestyle which does not accept cruelty. And therefore she has persuaded us into adopting a lifestyle, not just in terms of nutrition, but in terms of practicing a cruelty-free approach to life in general and to every living creature. I think we have to recognize the autonomy and the agency of every child. Too very often when we mainstream our policy approaches to disability, we tend to believe that we are in a parents' patria jurisdiction for young children with disabilities. Well, of course, they need robust policy making, but they also need policy making which is conversant with what they desire out of life. And I think that's something which we cannot ignore. We must also understand that disabilities, particularly disabilities originating in genes such as sickle cell anemia in our country, have a particular degree of prevalence among tribal groups, among the more marginalized citizens. And therefore we cannot really look upon, treating these disorders as merely a function of how much of a population group are we going to improve in terms of the quality of their lives. The reason why we have to go in with policy interventions is because they represent truly specific marginalized groups in our society who are in need of care and protection. But I'd like to, before I make a more formal presentation, I'd like to only share two more examples. I can talk about my children for the rest of the day, but that's not the purpose of this conference. But I want to share with you two of my own associations. One of the speakers who's going to talk to you is Rahul Bajaj, who's a Rhodes Scholar. And Rahul wrote to me a couple of years ago and said that I want to come back to Delhi and intern with you. And I said, why on earth would somebody want to give up the rest of a Rhodes Scholarship and come to work with a judge of the Supreme Court? I mean, go ahead and finish your PhD. So he said, no, I have something better in mind for my future. And so he came and worked with me. But he said, before I start working with you, I interned with Justice Lalit, and I realized in that short internship that there's so much that you have to do in the Supreme Court to make that workplace a barrier-free workplace for me. So I said, well, we'll try and do that. There's so much that a judge can do with a Chief Justice can do much more because, you can change policies. But even when I was a judge of the Supreme Court at that point of time, before my assuming office as Chief Justice, that really set us into making small and incremental changes in the way we work in the Supreme Court. Digitizing files, making those files compatible with screen reader access, OCR-enabled files. The website of the Supreme Court had a visual capture. So something as simple as altering a visual capture into a verbal capture makes a difference on whether someone with visual disabilities can access all the information which the Supreme Court provides. So in the course of our association with someone who was there to learn, I think we learned so much more, and our institutions get transformed. We have Sarasuni here, and she appeared in our court a few months ago, and we realized that we had no sign language interpreting facilities in the Supreme Court. Now, how does a young lawyer who has a particular condition live with dignity and conduct her profession with dignity unless we create those conditions? And we can't look at that as a function of how much would be the budgetary impact, because it's all about the nature of the society which we wish to create in future. Do we truly aspire to have an integrated, inclusive society? And if we do, I think there is so much that our society has to do and learn in terms of the aspirations of those who suffer from conditions of disability. And the last thing, then I'll briefly make my formal presentation. Yesterday in our court, we had someone on a wheelchair, and she was really assisting the court in a very important aspect of disability rights. And after the arguments were over and she was about to leave the court, I asked her, ma'am, what was your experience about navigating the space of the Supreme Court before you came into the court? So she said, well, I'm extremely happy because we have an accessibility desk. I was guided into where I should go. I didn't have any problem. But she says, I have one problem, and that is your courts are so overcrowded. So I said that, there's so much that judges can do, but I don't think I can do much about the population coming into the open court. On a lighter footing, one of the problems which we encountered trying to get these children to be mobile as they were growing up was about trying to find electronically operated wheelchairs. Because if you have a wheelchair which somebody has to push along in a home or outside, that means that that child is dependent on someone else. That child is dependent on someone else to go out. The child is dependent on someone else to escort her to the toilet. The child is dependent on someone else to put her from the bed to the wheelchair. We finally found wheelchairs which are electronically operated, but again, I wonder how many parents can afford this. We have a petition pending before our court on whether GST should not be removed on these assisted devices. How many parents can afford that cost of that single wheelchair? Incidentally, I always tell the girls that this is a home and not a highway. So when you zip in and around on your wheelchairs, please be careful that there are others you might be tripping over. Traditionally, caregiving has been an often overlooked and thankless task, shaped by patriarchal norms that have historically placed the burden of care squarely on families. The unique needs of persons with disabilities are still, in many cases, viewed as a private domestic issue rather than a collective social responsibility. While we may advocate for these needs to be met by our social institutions, those institutions often fall short of providing the support that is truly needed. The challenges faced by persons with disabilities extend far beyond issues of physical accessibility. They must also contend with entrenched societal biases, stereotypes, and misconceptions that permeate nearly every facet of life. These barriers are particularly pronounced when it comes to children, whose futures depend on our willingness to challenge these limitations. For children in conflict with the law, these challenges can be even more severe as they navigate a system that may not recognize their unique vulnerabilities. In the United States, studies show that as many as 70% of youth who enter the justice system have a mental health, sensory, or learning disability. I was going to spend a little bit of time on the legal framework, but I take it that, all of you who are so well-versed in this area of the law are conversant with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, a cornerstone document which has been ratified by almost every country in South Asia. We, of course, have in India a robust legal framework. Apart from the Convention on the Rights of the Child, we have the international principles and guidelines on access to justice for persons with disabilities. I'm compelled to share 4 key postulates that demand our attention at the present point of time. First, recognizing the problem. How can we address a problem we barely recognize? One of the most significant challenges we face is the absence of reliable data on children with disabilities, especially those who are survivors of sexual offenses or who come in conflict with the law. How can we design policies and implement solutions without understanding the scope of the issue? The lack of real-time, disaggregated data makes it difficult to fully appreciate the barriers these children encounter. Without precise data, effective planning, policy shifts and monitoring of outcomes remains out of reach. We must therefore begin by prioritizing improving the data collection systems within the juvenile justice framework. Data is the foundation for meaningful reforms, enabling policymakers to develop tailored interventions, measure their impact, and adapt strategies accordingly. Without this, children with disabilities will continue to fall through the cracks, unseen and underserved. Do we have a robust framework? Second, do we have a robust framework for facilitating access to justice for children with disabilities? The Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016 is a significant step towards ensuring that children with disabilities receive the care and rights they deserve, as it provides a comprehensive framework for The Juvenile Justice, Care and Protection of Children Act defines a child in need of care and protection as one who is mentally ill, mentally or physically challenged, or suffering from a terminal or incurable disease. The Act also states that anyone who commits an offense against a disabled child is liable to twice the penalty. But this punitive approach may not address the root causes of abuse or neglect, nor provide adequate support or rehabilitation for the child involved in conflict with the law. While these laws acknowledge the vulnerability of children with disability, their impact on the ground is often limited. The framework remains largely reactive, placing more emphasis on post-offense penalties rather than a proactive prevention, support, and rehabilitation. On the international front, the principles of equality, non-discrimination, and respect are foundation to disability rights. However, the lack of implementation mechanisms may render many legal protections ineffective in practice. The need to strengthen the frameworks is clear. For example, procedural accommodations such as interpreters, modified questioning, and the presence of intermediaries are often not provided, leaving children with disabilities at a disadvantage within the judicial system. Countries like New Zealand have implemented robust measures, including specialist advocates for children with disabilities and customized courtroom settings to accommodate their needs. In India, we are developing a module for vulnerable witness deposition centers. The idea of the vulnerable witness deposition centers is to have a national uniform model for devising courtrooms at low cost, consistent with our resource patterns, to allow for witnesses who are in special need and care when they encounter courtroom conflict to be able to depose effectively and without fear. The third aspect I want to emphasize is capacity building. Are we truly prepared? Are we equipped to handle the needs of children with disabilities in the justice system? A renowned psychologist, Reuven Feuerstein, posits that there are 3 prerequisites which must be met for an inclusive environment in the context of inclusive education: preparation of receiving institutions, preparation of the individual child, and preparation of parents. We need to extend this framework to the juvenile justice system. Have we prepared our justice institutions? Are the judges, police officers, and lawyers equipped to understand the unique challenges faced by children with disabilities? Sadly, the answer is often no. Professionals within the justice system require ongoing training and sensitization to comprehend the nuanced vulnerabilities of these children. Sensitization would not only reduce the re-victimization of children in legal proceedings, but also promote more compassionate handling of cases. For example, in the UK, specialized training programs for police officers and social workers dealing with children with disabilities have significantly improved justice outcomes by reducing trauma and improving communication between children and legal authorities. International cooperation is critical in this regard. Cross-border sharing of best practices, capacity building initiatives, and technical support from countries with more advanced systems can significantly improve our ability. The fourth aspect which I want to deal with is intersectionality, understanding multiple marginalizations. When we talk about juvenile justice, especially in the context of children with disabilities, we cannot ignore the concept of intersectionality. Disability often intersects with other marginalized entities, such as gender, caste, socioeconomic status, and ethnicity, amplifying the discrimination children face. The doctrine of intersectionality, coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, highlights how multiple identities intersect to create unique experiences of discrimination. For children with disabilities, these compounded vulnerabilities can have devastating effects. In a case which I had the occasion to deal with and author the judgment, Patan Jamal Wali versus State of Andhra Pradesh, the Supreme Court recognized the heightened vulnerability of a girl with a visual impairment who belonged to a scheduled caste and was subjected to sexual violence. This case not only sheds light on the sexual violence faced by disabled girls, but also highlights the double marginalization they endure, both as women and as individuals with disabilities. This dual vulnerability may mean that women with disabilities are often perceived as easy targets for sexual violence, influenced by societal perceptions of their diminished capacity and their perceived inability to speak out. Addressing these intersections is vital. We must ensure that justice system, from the police stations to the courtrooms, understands and responds to the compounded vulnerabilities of these children. The incorporation of restorative justice approaches is one such solution. The JJ Act outlines various rehabilitation and reintegration measures for children in conflict with law, such as counseling, education, vocational training, and community service. For children with disabilities, these measures can be adapted to ensure that they receive the specialized support they need to thrive. The true focus of this two-day consultation cannot therefore, and its importance cannot be overstated. I commend Justice Nagaratna for her exemplary leadership in prioritizing the protection of children with disabilities through the Juvenile Justice Committee. The consultations held across states have greatly enriched our understanding of the challenges and opportunities that these children encounter within the child protection system. Each of the sessions over the next 2 days addresses core aspects of the postulations I have flagged: recognition of the problem, building a robust framework, capacity building, and embracing intersectionality. This consultation, above all, is not just about theory. It is about actionable strategies for change. I'm also delighted with the launch of the Handbook on Persons with Disabilities, which aims to aid and sensitize not only the legal community, but also society at large in using inclusive terminology when referring to disabilities. Just recently, we dealt with a film on disability, and the film was supposed to be a film on humor about persons suffering from disabilities. Now, consistent with our commitment to the freedom of speech and expression under Article 19(1)(a), we didn't ban the film, but we laid down a cross-sectional framework on how filmmakers and producers of creative content must deal with disability. You can't exclude humor involving those who are disabled, but that humor should not target their condition by being pejorative. And therefore, this book, like its earlier, like the predecessor, the Gender Handbook which we produced, is intended to bring a greater sense of sensitivity on the part of everyone in society about the language of our discourse on disability. And of course, as you saw, the book is in Braille as well as an audiobook, ensuring that it is available to all regardless of their abilities. In conclusion, then, we must ask ourselves, are our justice systems flexible enough to accommodate the unique needs of children with disabilities? Are we building a system that seeks to rehabilitate rather than criminalize, to include rather than marginalize, and to empower rather than limit? We owe it to all children to ensure that the answers to these questions will be in the affirmative. I'm confident that this consultation will inspire meaningful dialogue, foster collaboration among all stakeholders involved, and help pave the way for a more inclusive and actionable solution-based society that we aspire to achieve in the future. Thank you very much for your patience and your time.
Thank you so much, sir, for this inspiring address, which has provided us with new perspectives and actionable takeaways. Hearing you, we all realize that the onus of having an inclusive society does not rest on children with disabilities. It rests on all of us here. With this, we come to the end of the inaugural session. I thank each